Hey everyone, Charlie here from the Atomic Age, and today I'm going to go over the movie Fat Man and Little Boy. This is from the late 80s, early 90s, and it follows Robert Oppenheimer, General Groves, and a host of other scientists and people from the Manhattan Project during World War II in the United States' quest to develop a nuclear bomb. So this movie on the whole focuses a lot on human relationships. I tend to prefer the technical aspects of the Manhattan Project. So if you're looking for supplementary material, I would highly recommend checking out this book, The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes, with my little subtitle of A History of Nuclear Physics. It really is an amazingly exhaustive and thorough book about the development of the atomic bomb and all the science necessary beforehand to establish that. And I will be drawing from this book as I review the movie, but it has been a few years since I've read it. Enough talk, let's get to the movie. All right, so this movie focuses exclusively at Los Alamos, which is where the bomb was actually designed and built. There were two other major sites in the Manhattan Project, and these were the Oak Ridge site in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the Hanford Site in Washington State. So at Oak Ridge, what they were doing was enriching uranium. To make a bomb with uranium, it needs to be almost exclusively the fissile part of uranium. Uranium has a fissile part and an unfissile part. And what fissile means is that you can split an atom very easily with a neutron, which is how you make a bomb. You split atoms with neutrons and they release more neutrons that go split more atoms, etc., etc. So the problem is uranium in nature is less than 1% fissile. So you have to set up infrastructure in order to concentrate that. The word enriched is the same as you would get at the supermarket with like enriched flour or enriched cereal. It's elevated in some component or ingredient that exists more than it would in nature. So you have to enrich the uranium to make a bomb out of it. And this is no small feat. This is probably the most expensive part of the Manhattan Project was enriching the uranium. It was really not known the best way to do it at the time, so they tried three different methods of enriching all at the same time because they just needed to get it done. Doesn't matter how much it costs, we're just going to try all three methods at once instead of just trying to guess which method of enriching would work best. Okay, so uranium enrichment is hard, and let's get into why. So the Oak Ridge site was developing three different enrichment processes. One was thermal diffusion, another was gaseous diffusion, and then the third was cyclotron or calutron. So let's start with thermal diffusion. So if you heat a fluid and it has lighter and heavier things in it, they tend to separate when heated. So the lighter thing goes to the hotter side and the heavier thing goes to the colder side. So you can use this to separate uranium when it's in the form of uranium hexafluoride. But the problem is that uranium-235, which is the fissile type you want for a bomb, and uranium-238, which is the non-fissile type, the type you don't want for a bomb, are very similar in weight. That's what the 235 and 238 mean. That's the weight of those isotopes. So since they're so similar in weight, it really takes a long time to get meaningful separation, or you have to send it through the same process multiple times to get meaningful separation. And this is true for every type of uranium enrichment. This is why it's hard, is because you're trying to separate things that weigh so similarly. Gaseous diffusion is when you have a gas that has like a barrier to pass through. The lighter gases will pass through it quicker than the heavier gases. So the uranium-235 would pass through this barrier quicker than the uranium-238, but they weigh so similarly that, again, you have this issue of having to run it through the same process multiple times to get meaningful separation. So lots of resources, lots of time required. And the third method is a calutron, which is a specific type of cyclotron, which is a way to accelerate particles. The calutron, though, is meant to separate particles. So what you do is you create ions out of uranium isotopes. An ion means that it's missing or has too many electrons, so it has a net charge on it. So you ionize uranium-235 and uranium-238, and you accelerate them through a circle. Uranium-235 is lighter, so it will take a tighter circle than the uranium-238. So then you can put a little thing to siphon off uranium-235. That one's called like electromagnetic separation. So you got, we talked about the thermal diffusion, so heating it up, gaseous diffusion. Lighter gases will pass through a porous barrier more quickly than heavier gases. And then electromagnetic separation. So the lighter uranium-235 isotope will take a sharper circle than a uranium-238 isotope when accelerated, and then you can siphon it off that way. So no one real method was king in the Manhattan Project. The process would start with thermal diffusion, and then the product of that was then fed to gaseous diffusion, and then the product of that was fed to electromagnetic separation. So it was really just trying to do whatever possible to get as much material through as you could. And with the amount of money poured into it and the amount of facilities built, like each one of these separate processes had its own facility at Oak Ridge. The gaseous diffusion was at a plant called K25. Thermal diffusion was at a plant called S50. And then electromagnetic separation, Calutron, was at a plant called Y12. So it was just an enormous undertaking. And it's really quite amazing how much progress was made in such a short amount of time with the Manhattan Project. But then it's also amazing to know how far these technologies came afterwards. And this is one of the main reasons it's still so hard to make nuclear weapons today. And one of those elements is enriching. Okay, so that's what was going on at Oak Ridge. The Hanford Site was for plutonium. That's because you can make a nuclear bomb with either uranium or plutonium. The problem with plutonium, though, is that it does not exist in nature on Earth. And that's because the half-lives of plutonium are relatively short. So whatever event in the cosmic universe millions upon billions of years ago created the material for our solar system, it happened so long ago that all the plutonium has decayed away. So to do that, you have to make plutonium in a reactor. You put uranium in a reactor, and when you hit uranium-238, that is the part of uranium that's not fissile, if you hit that with neutrons, you can turn uranium-238 into plutonium-239, which allows you to make a plutonium bomb. So those are your three main sites of the Manhattan Project. Los Alamos, which is designing and testing the bomb. Oak Ridge, which was enriching uranium. And then Hanford Site, which was creating plutonium.
Oh, if you want to take a shower, they turn off the water at 2 o'clock.
Nothing anywhere near as severe, but Los Alamos still kind of has that vibe. I mean, the town like shuts down at like 8 o'clock. Just a very sleepy town, except for the fact that like weapons design goes on there.
The new plutonium from Hanford's spontaneous fission rate is way too high.
There'll just be a fizzle, no explosion. So now plutonium is a problem.
All right, so spontaneous fission, that is another decay mode for very heavy isotopes like uranium, plutonium. This row of the periodic table here, which is called the actinides, are susceptible to spontaneous fission. And as you may have guessed, it just means when an isotope just splits randomly, as opposed to decaying and giving off like an alpha particle or a beta or a gamma. It just splits suddenly and gives off some neutrons as if it were a normal fission event from like a chain reaction. So plutonium, this is like the weakness for plutonium, if it were, is that if you're not careful in how you make it, it can have too many spontaneous fissions from the plutonium isotope plutonium-240. It can have too many spontaneous fissions from that, and as I said, give you a fizzle, which means the bomb will destroy itself just before getting to the full blast yield, so you'll get a fizzle. And this is what keeps plutonium from being used in a gun type. You cannot make a gun type bomb with plutonium, and it's because of the plutonium-240 and its spontaneous fission rate. Even with weapons grade plutonium, as the two pieces of plutonium come together in your gun type, there's so many plutonium-240 atoms spontaneously fissioning that they shoot neutrons out before you want them, and they start the chain reaction early. And then enough energy is released to dismantle the bomb, but to not give you the huge chain reaction you want. It is not possible to move the plutonium pieces fast enough to avoid those random neutrons flying around from spontaneous fission. And this can even be a problem in your implosion bomb here. So how do you control for plutonium-240 then? So, as I mentioned earlier, to get plutonium-239, you place uranium-238 in a reactor, and you hit it with neutrons, and then uranium-238 absorbs these neutrons and then eventually becomes plutonium-239. Once about 1% of your uranium-238 has turned into plutonium-239 is when you want to remove that fuel from the reactor and then reprocess it. This is how you separate plutonium from spent fuel. It's a chemical process. And this is the golden time to extract your plutonium, because you have as much of the plutonium-239 for your bomb as you want with as little of the plutonium-240 with the spontaneous fissions that you don't want. If you leave your plutonium in the reactor for too long, you start getting a lot more plutonium-240. And although plutonium-239 is a fissile isotope, it can absorb a neutron and not fission and instead become plutonium-240. So it's kind of obvious that leaving that in there for too long would start building up plutonium-240 there. Based on this scene, what happened at Hanford was that they left their plutonium in the reactor too long and they got too much plutonium-240. So their plutonium has moved out of what we call weapons grade into reactor grade instead. A larger fraction of plutonium-240 doesn't matter in a reactor. You can control for that. But in your bomb, you want like about less than 5% plutonium-240. And yeah, for plutonium, all you need to do is reprocessing. You do not need to enrich plutonium because you get enough plutonium-239 as it is just sticking it in a reactor. So all you have to do. This is in stark contrast to uranium, where you have to enrich it. With plutonium, you have to shove it in a reactor, or you have to put uranium-238 in a reactor rather, hit it with neutrons to turn it into plutonium-239. And then once you take it out, that 1%, that's your bomb material right there. Other than separating the plutonium from the spent fuel and the uranium, you don't need to do any plutonium separation or enrichment or anything like that. It's interesting to see the trade-offs and differences between uranium enrichment and plutonium production.
You see much of him?
Yes, I like him. You jealous?
Yeah.
You better do something about it.
Oh my god.
That means the Germans don't have a bomb. Weren't even close.
Is it wise? I mean, suppressing this?
Well, you tell me, Colonel.
I think at first thought, when thinking of the Manhattan Project, we'd always tend to think that it was all along intended for Japan because that's where it was used. But no, it was really all focused on as a counterpoint to Nazi Germany. They were the real threat in terms of atomic bomb development, and why the United States poured so much money into the atomic bomb was to counter Germany.
When I squeeze this, I get compression. Michael, we get a hollow sphere of plutonium, and we compress it, an implosion.
Chain reaction.
Boom!
The explosives go out.
But we make one that goes in.
Now, it cannot be understated how much of a technological challenge it was to create implosion. Because as John Cusack just said there, yeah, explosives want to go out. They want to do this. So what you have to figure out how to do is to make it instead go like this. To all go inside, all at the exact same moment. No, you cannot have any imperfections where the explosion is going some other direction, because you are trying to squeeze a hollow sphere of plutonium. And we're talking insane, immense amounts of pressure here. So it's going to look for any way to get out. So if there's an imperfection, it's going to squirt out some way. You're not going to get the full bomb yield that you want.
Perhaps you should think of these explosive wedges as forming part of a shell. They do redirect the shock waves in much the same way as a lens redirects light.
Yeah, in principle, very similar to changing the direction of light via glasses. Explosive lensing is a very elegant way to put it. Okay, so talking some more about implosion. So how do you actually do it? They didn't really get into the technical too heavy in this movie. This is a very human relationship kind of movie, not really a technical documentary. So the gist is you basically have two different types of explosives. As we know, when you blow up an explosive, it wants to blow outward radially in every direction. The shockwave will look like a sphere. So what you do is you take two different explosives that have two different speeds of detonation, and you embed the lower speed detonation explosive into the higher speed detonation explosive. So as we'll focus on like one chunk. There's going to be tons of chunks in a sphere around the fissile mass, but we'll look at one chunk for simplicity's sake. So as you detonate the high explosive, it's going to want to start bending outwards as it moves down towards the fissile mass. So what you do is you make this kind of like conical looking chunk of lower speed detonation explosive, and you put it inside the high speed explosive. So as this shockwave is trying to do this, it wants to expand radially. It hits the slower explosive, and that pulls the shock front back. So then it comes into a concave shape as opposed to convex. It's one of those things where once you hear it, you can't forget how to do it. But if you don't know, it's just really like a classic problem. Like, how the heck do you solve that? I remember reading about it in the How to Make the Atomic Bomb book, and it was just riveted in that part. I loved that. Just trying to think about it mathematically. Like, how do you solve this problem? How do you change the shape of the detonation wave? Great stuff. Oh boy, here we go. The cowboy days. All right, so this is very much the cowboy days here, where something like this nowadays would be done with very elaborate machinery to automate all this and control it remotely. And such an experiment would be undertaken from a control room many hundreds of yards away from the actual facility, just in case an accident happens, which we will be getting to here momentarily. But these are the cowboy days. There's a war going on. They needed the answers now. One could almost say that the fact that you have like regulations and such for all these things is so that you have enough framework and rules in place that forgive the crudity of this expression, but that so anyone could do it safely. In these days, these were all just a few scientists doing this with I don't know, it's like trying to have like these elaborate procedures for washing the dishes in your house, or fiddling with your stove or something. Like, you just work with it every day, become very intimately familiar with it. To try and like tell someone else how to do this would require a lot more formalization and standardization of procedures and such. But they were just doing this willy-nilly because it had to be done, and they trusted themselves to do it right. However, this is all actually to say that I believe this accident did not happen during the Manhattan Project. I believe it happened afterwards. And I'm a criticality safety engineer, so my job is to prevent what is happening here, criticality safety accidents. But I'm not a historian on these events, so I don't know the exact details on this without looking it up. And you can look it up just as much too, but I'm here to explain the physics of what's going on here. Now, let's let the rest of the scene play here.
Nobody move! Don't anybody move! Take off everything metal. Drop it to the floor. Mark the position you're standing in and get out.
Yikes. Okay, so this is my third time watching this movie, but the first time I saw it, it was a real shock to see I believe this is the only movie I've seen that actually depicts what just happened, and this is a criticality safety accident. So what the movie showed with that blue light is called a critical excursion. Now that happens when you get a self-sustaining chain reaction. Not good. You don't want that to happen anywhere except for where you want it to happen, like a nuclear reactor or an experiment. You do not just want a chain reaction to happen randomly. So my job is to prevent these from happening in the transport of nuclear material. Anyway, we got the glow of blue light. It has been reported that when people are very close to criticality safety accidents, that they see blue light, and that has to do with the subatomic particles interacting with their eyeballs. Either their eyeballs or the vision center of your brain. I'm not sure which off the top of my head, but you can see this blue flash supposedly from any angle. You don't even have to be looking at the accident. That's the real creepy part about it. Okay, so that short little chain reaction we just saw resulted in somewhere around 10 to the 16 to 10 to the 18 fissions. So that means somewhere around like 1 billion fissions. Each fission releases like 2 or 3 neutrons. So an enormous amount of neutrons. I'll write it all out on the screen here, but 10 to the 16 or 10 to the 18 means 1 followed by 16 or 18 zeros. That many fissions, and then 2 or 3 times that number of neutrons. So when he was the closest to it, so just the closer you are to it, the more of like the area you cover of all the radiation emitted. And then some people are standing behind things, so that's shielding. So distance, shielding, and time are the 3 things that you want to use to your advantage to avoid exposure to radiation. So get as far away as possible, be close to it for as short as possible, and put as much stuff between you and it as possible. But John Cusack here being that close, he got a lot of dose from that. This incident actually happened in 1946 or 1947, I believe. I just looked it up. He possibly saved the lives of everyone in there by putting his hand on it and separating it to make it subcritical. My first reaction is just run, tell everyone to run, just run away. Let it sit there and do its thing. It'll be fine. I mean, it's not ideal, but people won't be getting extreme doses of radiation. You can formulate a plan. You can act calmly to figure out a method to get in there and disassemble the supercritical configuration. And it's worth noting that this did not make a bomb, although this is supercritical. There was a little bit of pushback in my Chernobyl video that when Chernobyl exploded, it was not a nuclear bomb. This was not a nuclear bomb. There's no moderator here. This is as close to a bomb as you can get, but this did not make a nuclear bomb. 2 major types then of like supercriticality, which is what happens here when you get a self-sustaining chain reaction. You get one like this, which is called a critical excursion, and then the other kind that gives you the huge ass explosion is of course a nuclear bomb. So this is a criticality excursion. And that's the same with Chernobyl number 4. If anything, that was a criticality excursion, but that's a topic for another video. Okay, so then he mentioned taking off anything metal, leaving it where you were. When neutrons interact with matter, they can do what's called transmutation. So any atoms they hit may absorb that neutron and it turns into a different isotope that may in fact be radioactive. So if you got like a belt buckle or keys or change, you can measure the radiation of those pieces to determine how much dose they got from neutrons. And then the chalk mark is again to try and figure out everyone's doses. But yeah, the good old cowboy days. Yeah, this is a terrifying scene for me to watch. It's lost a bit of its potency because I've seen it a few times, but yeah, the first time I watched it, that was a doozy. Whenever that was, 25 years ago, something.
Doctor, how much did he get?
More than 1,000 rounds, we think.
More than 1,000 rad. Wow, that's a lot. Okay, so we're here at the trusty radiation dose rate chart. This is not directly applicable to this situation because we're dealing with a lot of neutron radiation that he experienced. There was gamma radiation for sure, but a lot of neutron radiation as well. For those of you who are not very familiar with radiation and its measurements, there are 3 different kinds. The first kind is called a Röntgen. It measures the ionization of air by photons or gamma rays, and it's pretty antiquated at this point. It's an older method of how we thought we understood radiation. It's called exposure. The second kind we have is dose. So this is like the unit would be gray or rad, gray and SI, and rad and imperial. And this measures the amount of energy that has literally been deposited in matter from radiation. So I got hit with a bunch of gamma rays. How much energy did it put into my body? Just energy. No different than like if you hit me with a ball, how much energy did that ball transfer to my body? It's the same thing. The final kind we have is equivalent dose. And this is REM or sievert, which is on this chart. Now this considers the impact of radiation based on particle type and tissue type in your body. So whether it interacted with your eye or your liver or your brain or your skin, and then whether that radiation was an alpha particle or a beta particle or a gamma ray or a neutron, all affect your equivalent dose. So for gamma rays, a Röntgen, a rad, and a REM are basically all equal. But once you start considering neutrons or betas or alphas, you have to start doing more complex calculations. And then once you consider those in terms of eyeballs and livers and skin, you have to do even more complex calculations. So they're not really that equivalent. But since we're dealing with such huge radiation numbers, we can use it to get a ballpark sense. He just said 1,000 rad, which would be 10 gray. 100 rad is equal to a gray. So that would be 10 sievert here on this chart. 10,000 millisievert is 10 sievert, is 10 gray, is 1,000 rad. So as a rough estimate, fatal dose, death within 2 weeks. And he did indeed die. I forget what his character's name is. I know he's John Cusack. And then I know this accident in particular happened to a guy named Slotin. I believe his name was Harry Slotin. This accident with the screwdriver and the cores coming together to make a supercritical mass. But yeah, so he's dead. I don't even remember if they show him dying in the movie. They do show him messed up, but not as bad as Chernobyl. And if we come over here to the Radiation Emergency Medical Management portion of the United States Health and Human Services website, we got these handy little charts here that were developed, I think, back in the Cold War for soldiers that give you a sense of what people will expect after getting certain amounts of radiation exposure, what symptoms they'll get and at what time, roughly. So yeah, you can see for this one here for the 8.3 to 11 gray, these are whole body doses too. So I don't know if it's fair to say that he got a whole body dose, but you can see at this one with the death at the bottom there that it's 100% dead within 2 to 3 weeks. Bleeding, fever, infection after half a week, fatigue, weakness, anorexia, diarrhea. Yeah, not good stuff. So he's going to go through it before succumbing to his radiation exposure there.
2, 1, 0.
It's like the most artsy shot of the whole movie. This one scene just feels like the tone feels so different than the rest of the movie, and I guess that's like a good thing. It really captures like the weirdness of the moment, so I approve. All right, so there you go, Fat Man and Little Boy. Special shout out to all my patrons. Thank you for all your support. On the whole, I think it's a fine movie. I think the first half is a little dull, but to be fair, with when it comes to the Manhattan Project, I love the technical aspects. The human stuff doesn't really interest me on its own. In context of the technical, it's a bit more interesting, but I really just enjoy the technical aspects of it. Not sure how rewatchable it is. I mean, I guess it's evidenced by the fact that this is my third time watching it in 10 years or so, 15 years, 20, 25, whatever. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely check it out if you've never seen it, but the book I recommended in the intro, much more enjoyable to me. Quite a tome, quite exhaustive on the history of nuclear physics up to through the end of World War II there. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. Leave your comments below. Let me know if you have any questions, comments, concerns, and maybe I'll make a comment video. Go over some pressing comments, and I will see you guys next time. And then it'll become plutonium-240, which has a very high fraction of spontaneous fission decay rate.